Hello, everyone. Today, I'm not just sharing a story with you. This is a real account filled with emotion and heartbreak about the poor choices we can all too easily make in life. This tale will make you reflect on love, betrayal, and the cost of crossing boundaries you once thought were unbreakable. So, listen along and see if you can find any part of yourself in it. My name is Claire, a 27-year-old woman living in a large home in the suburbs of New York. People often say my life is perfect, that I have everything anyone could ever want: a happy family, a devoted husband, and warm dinners together. But only I know that behind this flawless exterior lies an emptiness no one can fill. My husband, David, is the ideal man. He has a stable job as a senior manager and ensures we live a comfortable life. Yet, his career is like a relentless beast that never rests. Every time he leaves for a business trip, the days without him stretch endlessly. Alone in our big house, I often find myself staring out the window, where the distant glow of city lights mirrors the loneliness in my heart. Though our home is luxurious and modern, it can't mask the monotony of those long evenings. I couldn't wait forever for David to come back. On the days he was away, it felt like a piece of my life was missing. Meals without him, silent nights without his voice. It made me feel like a ghost drifting through my own home. But what left me feeling even more adrift was my relationship with Mr. Richard, my father-in-law. Richard is very different from David. At 60 years old, he still carries a unique charm, not because of his rugged looks, but because of his calm demeanor, his mature way of life, and the profound understanding he offers to anyone who needs it. Whenever I felt troubled or simply wanted someone to talk to, Richard was always there. He never rushed to judge, unlike others around me. He listened, shared stories from his youth, and imparted lessons I needed to hear. Over time, I grew to rely on him, not as a daughter-in-law to her father-in-law, but as someone seeking solace in a soul weathered by life's storms. Our conversations would stretch for hours, and I felt like I had found a steady anchor in the chaos of life. It was during these moments that I realized I needed more than just David's attention. Slowly, an indescribable feeling began to take root in my mind whenever I was with Richard. It wasn't infatuation or love, but a sense of security, a peculiar closeness I couldn't quite explain. I couldn't deny that Richard seemed to understand me better than anyone in the family, including my husband. Everything was about to change, and I had no idea what would happen if I let this relationship continue. All I knew was that every time David left for a business trip, I found myself growing closer to Richard, unaware that these steps would lead me to a point of no return. The bond between us was no longer as innocent as it once was. At first, I thought I was simply seeking emotional support, someone to ease the loneliness during those long nights without my husband. But as our talks continued, I noticed how Richard's knowing gaze began to alter me, shifting my perspective on the world around me. He wasn't like other men I'd known. He wasn't overly aggressive or prone to jokes, but he carried an undeniable allure. His calmness was magnetic, drawing me in bit by bit. Without realizing it, I became immersed in his warmth and his stories. Gradually, I started seeking out our meetings, not out of loneliness, but because I genuinely felt happy when he was near. Richard always knew how to make me feel special. A simple question like, "Are you okay?" was enough to make me open up completely. And he never just listened. He responded with gentle, understanding words, always knowing exactly what I needed: comfort, encouragement, or simply empathy. One evening, after a tiring day at work, I went to him as usual. David was away on another business trip, and the house was silent, like an empty shell. When I walked into the living room, Richard was seated in his favorite armchair, reading an old book, as he often did. He smiled and gestured for me to sit. "You look tired. Sit here with me," he said softly, his voice like a soothing melody. I sat beside him, my eyes drawn to him, a strange sensation stirring within me. Our conversation continued, but this time it felt different. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the warm glow of the lights, the gentle rustle of the wind outside. Everything seemed to align with something unspoken. We talked about life, about loneliness, and then Richard looked directly at me, his deep eyes holding mine. "Claire, sometimes people just need someone to listen, to share with, so they don't feel alone," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if every word carried both truth and profound insight. I couldn't pull away. His gaze, his words, the closeness, it all made me feel like a trapped animal, unable to escape the vortex he had unknowingly created. And then, without realizing when it happened, I felt his hand gently touch mine. I shivered but didn't pull away. Instead, I felt an inexplicable urge to move closer, a sensation I couldn't define. The room seemed to freeze. Richard looked up, his gaze no longer just comforting, but filled with a gentle, captivating charm. I could distinctly sense his breath nearer to me than ever before. Yet there was something that kept me silent, unable to speak or act, leaving me to sit quietly as Mr. Richard drew me closer. I couldn't suppress the growing sense of closeness and safety in my heart, which flared up like a smoldering flame, now beyond my control. "Claire," he whispered, his voice carrying an unrefusable invitation. Before I could gather my thoughts, he leaned in gently, his words washing over my mind like a wave, erasing all reason and barriers around me. That night, David left again for another long business trip, as he often did. As he picked up his suitcase, I forced a smile and said, "I'll be fine. Don't worry," even though deep down I wished he wouldn't go. But I knew his work always came first. He left, and I was once again faced with long, quiet nights, the only sound being the wind whistling through the window cracks. I couldn't bear the emptiness any longer. I needed someone to talk to, someone to share the emotions swirling inside me. Naturally, my thoughts turned to Mr. Richard. Surely he was still in his cozy living room, seated in his favorite armchair. I never grew tired of talking to him, even if the stories were sometimes trivial. He was the one who made me feel less alone. When I knocked and entered, Richard was sitting in the dim light of the room, the warm yellow glow illuminating part of his face. The light made him seem familiar, like someone who could truly understand the void in my heart. "Claire, come in," he said warmly, as if he had been waiting for me. I sat beside him, feeling a sense of comfort and peace. For a moment, we didn't speak, simply sitting together in silence. It felt like no words were needed. We had spent many evenings like this, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Richard's gaze lingered on me longer than usual, his eyes holding something deep, like an unspoken invitation. My heartbeat quickened, and a strange unease crept into my mind. "Are you okay, Claire?" he asked, but it wasn't just a simple question. His eyes, filled with understanding, made me feel like I was the only person who mattered to him. I couldn't answer immediately. The question stirred too many emotions. How could I respond when there was so much I wanted to say? I pressed my lips together, trying to stay calm, but his eyes, no longer those of a father, but of a man I found inexplicably attractive, held me captive. "Claire," Richard said, his voice carrying a newfound determination, as if he were finally voicing something he had long considered. "Do you know that sometimes closeness can erase all distance?" I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. In that moment, the allure in his eyes was so powerful that I couldn't look away. I no longer felt like his daughter-in-law, or even like I was in my husband's home, where I once felt safe. Instead, I felt a longing, an irresistible urge I couldn't fight. His breath grew closer, and I knew he felt it too. The boundaries we had built were crumbling. As he moved nearer, I felt a strange, undeniable connection. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, our emotions intertwined, and an overwhelming desire. When Richard reached out, I didn't pull back. I felt like a different person, someone detached from the world I knew. "Claire," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Can you let yourself feel this?" His voice was soft, an invitation I couldn't refuse. That moment, one I can never forget, marked a boundary I knew I couldn't cross back from. The room fell eerily silent, save for the sound of my pounding heart, which felt like both a warning and a challenge. My thoughts were paralyzed, uncontrollable. Mr. Richard, the man I called my father-in-law, was no longer a figure of reason. He had become something mesmerizing, a desire I couldn't explain. His hands gently moved across my shoulders, then to my neck, finally resting on my face. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as if waiting for me to respond, to act. I couldn't escape his gaze. The words I had rehearsed, the refusals I had prepared, vanished. All I could do was look at him into those deep, dark eyes and feel an unfamiliar heat rising within me. "Claire," he whispered again, his voice low, his breath hot against my face. "Do you want to try this feeling, one you've never known before?" I couldn't answer. His words, his voice, left me powerless. Everything was spiraling out of control. The temptation, the pull, was overwhelming, like a boat caught in a current with no way to turn back. I glanced down at his hand, now resting on my face, his skin warm, as if the world had narrowed to just him and me. I didn't think I could stop, though deep down I knew this was wrong. It wasn't just a betrayal of my husband, but also a betrayal of myself. Yet in that moment, those thoughts didn't matter. Reason was silenced, and my emotions took over completely. Then Richard moved closer, and I felt his breath on my face. In that instant, I knew I was no longer the daughter-in-law of a happy family, no longer the wife, the mother, the responsible woman I had always been. I stood on the edge of temptation, just one step away from giving in. He gently drew me closer, and I felt like a coiled spring, unable to resist. I asked myself, can I stop before it's too late? Can I escape this whirlwind? But the answer was no. Moments later, I felt his soft kiss, not hurried or desperate, but tender and filled with understanding. Everything around us faded, leaving only the two of us. His lips were warm, and I lost myself in that moment, a release for all the emotions I had buried deep inside. I couldn't stop anymore. There was no turning back. Then, it wasn't just a gentle kiss anymore. It became something more, a collision of two bodies caught in an uncontrollable passion. My thoughts blurred, the room seemed to spin, and I no longer knew who I was or where I was. There was only Richard and me, two people who had crossed a line and couldn't go back. The cost of this moment, I didn't know how I would bear it. When it was over and our breathing steadied, I felt an odd emptiness. It wasn't the satisfaction I had imagined, but a profound sense of loss, as if I had lost something vital. The relief I thought I'd feel was replaced by crushing guilt. Richard stood a few steps away, his eyes still on me, but the urgency in his gaze was gone. The room fell eerily silent, as if we were suspended in an endless void. "Claire," he said softly, but his voice was different now, cold, stripped of its earlier charm and desire. It was as if he, too, realized we had gone too far, beyond any hope of redemption. I lowered my head, unable to meet his eyes. I couldn't face the regret I knew was there. We had done something wrong, and now the weight of it burned like an unquenchable fire. Guilt wrapped around my mind like a dark cloud. I replayed every moment, every step I took toward him, every word, every glance. How could I explain myself? How could I face myself after what had happened? I knew I couldn't keep living this lie, couldn't carry this secret without being consumed by guilt. I was David's wife, the mother of my children, the daughter-in-law of this family. But now, I had lost everything I once held dear. "Claire," Richard said again, his voice tinged with concern, as if he sensed my shattered state. "Are you okay?" How could I say I was okay when my heart was in pieces? How could I face him, knowing I had done something unforgivable? I shook my head, unable to speak. All I wanted was to escape, to run from these feelings. But no matter how far I ran, the truth would always follow. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, and now I had to face the consequences. Richard stepped closer, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. I couldn't speak, only feel the warmth of his touch, which somehow made the pain worse. The guilt and realization were so overwhelming that tears spilled out. I didn't want to cry, but I couldn't stop. "Claire, don't blame yourself," he said. "We've been lost for a long time. We're just finding what we lost." But his voice carried exhaustion and confusion. We didn't need to say more. Words were pointless now. There was only silence, an acknowledgement that we had gone too far. The guilt was irreversible. I had done something I never imagined, and now I had to find a way to live with it. The next morning, as sunlight filled the room, I realized everything had changed forever. Not just my relationship with Richard, but with myself and my family. I couldn't escape the guilt, couldn't face David if I kept hiding this. I had crossed a threshold with no way back. I had betrayed. I got out of bed and wandered through the quiet house I once called home. Everything was the same. The pictures on the walls, the dining table, the chair I had sat in countless times. But now it all felt cold and unfamiliar. I no longer belonged here. I wasn't the daughter-in-law of a happy family anymore. I was an adulterer, someone who had betrayed the people I loved most. In the living room, I saw Richard sitting there, drinking coffee as usual. His eyes no longer held the fire they once did, no longer the intensity. They were cold and distant, as if he, too, understood we were at a point of no return. "Claire," he said, his voice slow and grave. "Last night, we did something that can't be undone, and I can no longer help you." His words struck me like a blow to the heart. I knew he was feeling the same pain I was, but I couldn't blame him. I had brought myself to this place. I was the one at fault, and now I had to confront the truth. I glanced at him, then turned away, hurrying out into the garden. The chilly morning wind swept past, making me shiver, not from the cold, but from the weight of my emotions. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a vast emptiness. Everything I had believed in, everything I loved, had crumbled. I was left standing in the ruins, unsure of where to go next. I had made the wrong choice, even though I knew it was wrong, and I couldn't stop myself. Now, I had nothing left to hold on to. When David returned, I knew I couldn't face him anymore. The look in his eyes would be too much to bear. It was too late. I went back inside and faced Mr. Richard one last time. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice trembling. "I won't let this destroy my family." He looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with desire or charm, only understanding and compassion. "Go, Claire," he said. "You need time to think about what happened. We all do." His words felt like a final goodbye. I didn't know if I could live with the shadow of this betrayal, but I knew one thing. I had to leave. I needed to walk away from everything and start over. As I stepped out of that house, I felt a profound shift within myself, not relief or peace, but a deep, unshakable regret and a guilt that could never be undone. I had lost what mattered most to me, and I knew I could never get it back. I left without saying goodbye, without offering an explanation. My steps were quick, but my heart felt hollow. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do, but I knew I had to face myself and live with the consequences of my actions.